Well, good morning and welcome back to our daily devotions again as we continue our way through the book of Psalms. It's amazing, if you've been paying attention, how each one of these so far, from number 1 to this morning, number 10, have seemingly related so closely to what we're going through in our present day with the pandemic, the shutdown, and all the fears and concerns about the virus and things around it. This morning we're in Psalm number 10, if you'd like to read along. Why, O Lord, do you stand far away? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? In arrogance, the wicked hotly pursue the poor. Let them be caught in the schemes that they have devised. For the wicked boasts of the desires of the soul, and the one greedy for gain curses and renounces the Lord. In the pride of his face, the wicked does not seek him. All his thoughts are, there is no God. His ways prosper at all times. Your judgments are on high, out of his sight. As for all his foes, he puffs at them. He says in his heart, I shall not be moved. Throughout all the generations, I shall not meet adversity. His mouth is filled with cursing and deceit and oppression. Under his tongue are mischief and iniquity. He sits in ambush in the villages. In hiding places, he murders the innocent. His eyes stealthily watch for the helpless. He lurks in ambush like a lion in his thicket. He lurks that he may seize the poor. He seizes the poor when he draws them into his net. The helpless are crushed, sink down, fall by his might. He says in his heart, God has forgotten. He has hidden his face. He will never see it. Arise, O Lord, O God. Lift up your hand. Forget not the afflicted. Why does the wicked renounce God and say in his heart, you will not call to account? But you do to see, for you note mischief and vexation, that you may take it into your hands. To help to you, the helpless commits himself. You have been the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked and the evildoer. Call his wickedness to account till you find none. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations perish from his land. O Lord, you hear the desire of the afflicted. You will strengthen their heart. You will incline your ear to do justice to the fatherless and the oppressed, so that the man who is of the earth may strike terror no more. Now, this particular psalm is not attributed to any particular author. We don't know if it's David or somebody else. But it is what is sometimes known as an imprecatory psalm. Imprecatory psalms are often prayers of basically pleas of desperation that God will intervene in a situation between the individual praying and their opponent, their enemy. And they'll often ask for God to intervene mightily and forcefully, violently even, if you will. You notice in this particular psalm, he calls on God to break the arms of his enemy. Elsewhere, he calls on God to dash the children of the enemy on the rocks in one of the later psalms. And so it's an imprecatory psalm. But notice these are never psalms where we're calling out for God to intervene just greedily on our own behalf. They're all psalms ultimately recognizing the goodness of God, his mercy for his people, his concern for those who are downtrodden and broken. And so this morning, as we look at Psalm number 10, we may not be facing a mortal enemy. We may not be facing an enemy with guns. In fact, in some cases, we're facing an enemy that's smaller than even a microscope itself could pick up. We're looking at an enemy, though, perhaps even greater than that, and that is enemy. That is the enemy of sin. It is the enemy who brings into our minds doubts and concerns. The enemy that never seems to give up. The enemy that never seems to tire. And so this morning, as we read Psalm number 10, let's think about how it is that we might call on God today to intercede on our behalf. That the enemy seems to be out of control. That the enemy seems to be all victorious. But we need to be reminded, as the psalmist does, that God wins in the end. God cares for his people. And so let's work through again a few selected verses in Psalm number 10. Psalmist begins with a very honest, plaintive cry, one that you surely have prayed, if not during this particular crisis and situation and other times in your life. Why, O Lord, do you stand far away? Where are you? Why can I not feel you? Why can I not see you? Why do I not hear you anymore? Lord, why do you seem to be unconcerned? Why, O Lord, do you stand far away? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? Sometimes when we're in the midst of situations like this, or illness, or the death of a loved one, it often feels as though God has abandoned us. And so it's honest. It's heartfelt. God already knows what you're thinking. God already knows what you're feeling. So cry out. Be honest in your prayers. Perhaps the one who needs to hear your honesty is not God, but yourself. Admit your weakness, admit your struggles, and see if he doesn't answer. And then he goes on to talk about his enemy, the wicked, at length. In arrogance, the wicked hotly pursue the poor. Let them be caught in the schemes that they have devised, he prays. The wicked boasts of the desires of his soul. He's greedy for gain, and he curses, according to verse 3, and renounces the Lord. Those who are victorious, those who are wealthy, those who are powerful often assume that it's because of their abilities. Remember, King Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel takes credit for his greatness until God strikes him with madness and sends him into the field to eat grass like an oxen. He says in his pride, the face, verse 4, the wicked does not seek God. All his thoughts are, there is no God. In fact, if they're honest, their thought is that they're God. His ways prosper, the psalmist complains in verse 5. But God's judgments are on high and out of his sight. As for his foes, he puffs at him. He's not worried about those who might be against him. He says in his heart, verse 6, I won't be moved. Throughout all generations, I shall not meet adversity. His mouth is filled with cursing and deceit and oppression. Under his tongue are mischief and iniquity. This enemy seems to be all victorious. He seems unchallenged in the world in which he lives. And the people of God are oppressed. They're beaten down. And they seem to feel as though God has turned his back on them. And maybe the enemy is right. He sits in ambush in the villages. He hides in places and he murders the innocent. He eyes stealthily, watching for the helpless. He lurks in ambush like a lion. He lurks that he might seize the poor. He seizes the poor and draws them into his net. The helpless, he says in verse 10, are crushed. They sink down. They fall by his might. It seems like everything the wicked wants to accomplish, he's able to do. He says in his heart, God has forgotten. He has hidden his face. He'll never see it. Again, so even the wicked assumes that God is not watching or paying attention. Then here comes the psalmist's cry. Verse 12, arise, O Lord, O God, lift up your hand. Forget not the afflicted. See, in our times of trouble, whether it's against a physical enemy or an invisible enemy or just doubt or perhaps Satan himself, we need to remember that God is there and he's listening to our cries, and we need him to lift up his hand. We need him to show us, remind us visibly that he's not forgotten the afflicted. Why does the wicked renounce God and say in his heart, you will not call to account? Verse 14, but you do see, speaking of God, you note mischief and vexation, that you may take it into your hands to help to you the helpless commits himself. You have been the helper of the fatherless. See, God is aware. God is watching. He's not off in a distance busy with something else. The 7 billion plus people on the planet are not too many for him to watch over and care for. He's aware. Perhaps he's waiting for the right moment. Perhaps he's waiting right now for you to cry out and beg for mercy. He knows it. He takes note. He takes it into his hands. The helpless commit themselves to him. He's the father or the helper of the fatherless. To the enemy, here comes the imprecation. Break the arm of the wicked and evildoer. Call the wickedness to account till you find no more. Clear it out. Purge it. The Lord, verse 16, is king forever and ever. See, that's one of the great themes of the Bible. We begin with Genesis, where God as king creates the universe by a spoken desire. We have Isaiah enter the throne room of God in Isaiah 6, and he sees God on a throne. The people complain to Samuel, give us a king like the nations. Samuel complains, and God says, Samuel, they're not rejecting you. They've rejected me as king. That's why in the book of Judges, all the problems they keep going through, the common theme there is there was no king in Israel. They'd already rejected God. Instead, every man did what was right in his own eyes. Today, we wonder if God is king. A virus seems to be running rampant. The economy seems to be on the verge of teetering into nothingness. We're not sure when we'll be back in church. We're not sure when we'll be able to recover from this. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations are going to perish one day from his land. O Lord, you hear the desire of the afflicted. You will strengthen the heart. You will incline your ear to do justice to the fatherless and the oppressed, so that the man who is of the earth may strike terror no more. Whatever your enemies, remember this morning. God is king. He cares for the fatherless. He takes care of the victim. And one day, those apparent victories of evil will turn out to be ultimate and real defeat. Don't forget that. Turn to the Lord, cry out in your need, and give him all the glory for it when he answers your cries.